Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the annual Sister Maria Augusta Neal Lecture, sponsored by the Center for Mission and Spirituality at Emmanuel. I'm Sister Mary Johnson, and I'm chair of the Sociology Department. And I'm honored to welcome all of you today, particularly some Emmanuel alumni who were able to come and join us, and to welcome in a particular way Professor Jack Levin of Northeastern University. This particular lecture is quite significant in that I am an Emmanuel alum, and I graduated in 1979, and Sister Maria Augusta was one of my teachers, and she taught us one day about Jack Levin. So, it's taken me over 30 years to invite you here, Jack, but we have been delighted that we could welcome you for several reasons. One is that I can remember in the late 70s, in the mid-70s, you wrote a book about prejudice, and it was Sister Maria Augusta's, one of her interests. She was, as we know, a great social justice advocate, and she alerted us to your work. And many Emmanuel alums from that generation have followed your career for the last 30 years or so. And not only from a social justice point of view, but from an empirical point of view, because the other strength of Sister Maria Augusta was that she taught us how important good data are. And you have done what few sociologists have been able to do, and that is bring hard empirical data to the light. And the media has been able to communicate key data because of your influence. And that was one of the things that Sister Maria Augusta stressed over and over again with us. So from the point of view of her work on social justice and her commitment to hard empirical data, you certainly are very worthy to deliver the lecture in her name. So I would like now to call Professor Janice Free to the mic to introduce her teacher, Professor Jack Levin. Janice?
I'd like to extend my welcome to you all as well. I'm glad that you could join us this afternoon. I'm very excited to introduce my former professor, Dr. Jack Levin from Northeastern University. He is the Brudnick Professor of Sociology and Criminology and co-directs the Center for Violence and Conflict, as well as teaches courses in Sociology of Violence and Hate at Northeastern. Jack has specialized in the area of violence, crime, and murder and hate for over the last 3 decades. One of his many strengths has been his ability to present complex theoretical perspectives on crime to the general public in an interesting and understandable manner, as well as an entertaining manner often as well. Jack has published more than 200 scholarly articles, has co-authored or authored over 30 books, including titles such as Mass Murder, America's Growing Menace, Why We Hate, Hate Crimes Revisited, The Will to Kill, Making Sense of Senseless Murder, and The Violence of Hate. Additionally, he appears frequently on national television programs, including Oprah Winfrey Show, 48 Hours, 2020, NBC Dateline, The Today Show, and Good Morning America. As if all that is not enough, I speak from firsthand experience when I say that Professor Levin is an amazing and skilled professor, well-loved by all of his students at Northeastern. I want to thank you, Jack, both professionally and personally, for being here with us today. I've heard him speak countless times and truly have never been disappointed, and I know you will not be either. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Jack Levin, a well-known criminologist, educator, and my personal mentor and friend.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here this afternoon at Emmanuel College. It would have been a pleasure anyway, but to speak as a lecture in the name of Sister Maria Augusta Neal is especially great. Let me tell you, I owe her a debt of gratitude because in the 70s, when I was a young sociologist just starting out, she and I talked about her experiences with apartheid in South Africa. I was doing a book on prejudice called The Functions of Prejudice, and I used her experiences in my book to illustrate dehumanization of victims. She told me the story of the day that she was having a picnic with some of her friends, all of whom were white, in Johannesburg. And she looked across the road, and there were some black South Africans on the other side, and they were doing something strange. I don't even remember what it was. She said to her white friends, look at those people. They looked across the road, and they said, what people? You see, under apartheid in South Africa, whites did not refer to blacks as people. So, you know, that was a great example of dehumanization. Only one experience of Sister Marie Augusta Neal's that I put in my book. I do want to thank Sister Mary. We have a lot in common, it turns out, especially in terms of the things that we want to understand and we study. And of course, to Professor Free, I've known her for many years, and I've always had a lot of respect for her ability as a scholar and a professional, and also as a human being, I have to say. So thank you so much. And before I start, I want to clear the air about one thing. Now, I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to bore you. But I do want to make sure that you can focus on what I have to say. I want you to be able to concentrate, and I don't want you to be distracted by what I look like. Okay? So let's be upfront about this so we can move on. How many of you think I look like Albert Einstein? Would you raise your hand? Yeah. Now, I have to tell you, you and 8 million others. Well, you know, at least 2 people stop me every day and tell me that. In fact, I was in Salt Lake City, Utah, 2 months ago. I was in a hotel. Guy walked up to me and he said, I want to thank you for your great scientific discoveries. He was not talking about criminology, by the way. But I have a long list of lookalikes. Again, I don't want to bore you, but I think it's worth spending about 3 minutes to go through these so we can all move on and focus on what I have to say, which I think is kind of important. So here are the people that I've been told that I look like. Are you ready? David Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Ben and Jerry. Yeah, you know, how could I look like both of them? It doesn't make any, they're not even related to one another. Must be the ice cream. Geppetto. Listen, I got this in YouTube. Somebody commented on something I said. They said I look like Geppetto. Super Mario. I don't get that one at all. Captain Crunch. One of my students eats this for breakfast. I don't know, I don't. But Mark Twain. Grandpa Joe in the Willy Wonka film. Juan Valdez without coffee. Don King with white skin. This is thought-provoking. You'll have Mr. Monopoly. Yep. Now, this one I've got to explain, and then we'll move on. I was walking into a supermarket. I was in the parking lot, and a little girl about 8 years old was holding hands with her mother. She looked at me, then looked back at her mother, and she shouted, "Look, Ma, there goes Beethoven." Well, I know what Beethoven looks like, and I don't look anything like Beethoven. I told one of my colleagues about this, and he said, she meant the dog. Now, I don't look like this dog either, but I do look like my own dog. There we are. Anyway, you know, it's true that for the last 30 years, I've focused a great deal of effort in trying to understand, make sense of extreme violence. And so the question often arises, why do I focus so much on murder? Well, the first answer is kind of obvious. I think most people would agree that murder is the most serious form, murder and rape certainly, the most serious form of violence. But the second answer is not so obvious, and that is that murder is our most reliable measure of criminal violence. You know, it's so easy to fudge when it comes to assaults and rape. Police departments around the country, Philadelphia, Boca Raton, St. Louis, have tried to make their crime statistics as rosy as possible so they'll look good to the public, their own residents. And they've, instead of reporting, for example, rapes of prostitutes to the FBI, they file them away with a memo in a file cabinet. Nobody ever knows. So they're not reported in national statistics. And St. Louis looks like it has almost no rapes. The same thing has been happening with assaults. You know, in the index crimes reported by the FBI and to the FBI by local police departments, aggravated assault, usually with a weapon, is a major serious offense. Simple assault isn't. So instead of reporting an attack with a gun or a knife as an aggravated assault, they report it as a simple assault. They did that systematically in Philadelphia until they got caught. So, you know, you can conceal lots of different forms of violent crime, but it's hard to hide the body. I mean, it can happen, and it does, I'm sure, once in a while. But usually when there's a homicide victim, the press will be all over it, and it's very hard to conceal the fact that we've got a murder on our hands. And that's why focusing on murder gives us the most reliable indicator of violent crime. Well, we do have a very high rate of violence in the United States. Certainly our murder rate is very high, as you'll see in a minute. And here are some of the factors, the variables that have been used to explain our high murder rate. The prevalence of firearms, guns. You know that we have 200 million handguns. Problem in our country is not semi-automatics. It's handguns, you know, because gangs don't want a semi-automatic usually. They want a small caliber handgun that they can easily conceal, put in their back or in their pocket and carry around. That's not possible with a big, heavy semi-automatic rifle. So that's the real problem. Income inequality, the subculture of violence, the eclipse of community, and then excessive national publicity. I want to go over each of these so that you understand. Guns, that's right. Yeah, you know that we have the highest murder rate, that's per 100,000 population, among Western industrialized nations. Take a look at this. Our murder rate, 5.5. That's 5.5 murders per 100,000 people in the United States. Take a look at Switzerland. We're more than 5 times higher on the homicide scale. You know, we're more than 5 times higher than Japan. We're 3 times higher than Sweden. We're almost double Spain. So you can see that among these industrialized countries in the West, we do indeed have a lot of murders. There's no question about it. Take a look at England versus the United States. And this is a trend over a period of time, and it continues today, where England has a much lower murder rate than we do. And look, a lot of that has to do with the availability of firearms. There's no question about it. But not the whole thing. Can't blame it all on guns. Wish it were that simple. Even if we got rid of the guns, as you'll see, we'd still have a very high rate of violence. But we do have a lot of murders relative to England. And yet, if you look at the assault rates, they're about the same. And that's because in assault, the victim doesn't die. So the weapon is not as lethal. In other words, you don't need a firearm to assault someone. And England and the United States have pretty much the same rate over a period of time. And look at this, rape, which is very infrequently committed with a firearm, is much higher in the United States than England. So again, it's not just guns.